everyone. Today I have with me screenwriter and author Joe Gazzam. Thank you, Joe, for being with me today.
Absolutely.
I was so excited to talk to you because I happen to have a real thing lately of screenwriter author people. Because I have read a lot of books lately, it seems like have come across my way, written by screenwriters. And I'm almost getting to the point where when I read the book, I can tell they're a screenwriter without even looking to see if they are.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
There's just something about the way.
Yeah, no, something. That's okay. There's something about the way that a screenwriter makes a book that can tell a compelling story in under 300 pages.
Yeah, no, believe me. I mean, there's not much to a script, so you're sort of under the gun to jam everything you can in there and make it work. So I think all screenwriters are sort of baffled at first when you have that wide open canvas. So, yeah, I can see where it's sort of brief as a book.
Yeah, but I first of all, as a reader, and especially as a reader who reads so many books, I can really appreciate a book that's under 300 pages and is a page turner, and I love it because a lot of times, you look at a 400-page book and you're like, okay, this is going to take a while, and so for me, that's a weekend where anything under 300 pages I can sit down in the day and have it read. And, and I enjoy that. And I know a lot of other readers enjoy that too, if they like to read as much as I do. So anyway, let's start off with, I heard a little bit about your story, so I know a little bit. And You're the kind of screenwriter that I love to talk to because you did not go to 5 screenwriting schools and, decided to become a professional screenwriter when you were 10 and, and go that route. So I'm on the East Coast. So when I saw you were born in Baltimore and then grew up in Fort Lauderdale, I did a lot of that back and forth, I live in Pennsylvania. We always went to Florida for vacation, and my grandparents lived there, and I'm really familiar with the Fort Lauderdale area. And I was like, wow, how lucky could you get? I mean, as opposed to growing up in Baltimore, I would much rather grow up in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, well, it's funny. My mom is from Pennsylvania. She was actually Miss Penn State back in the day. So there you go. But so it was nice. I don't know if I could ever live there again because it's so just oppressively hot and humid. I go back I went to the University of Florida, so I go back for football games, and it just wilt. It's so hot. I just don't have any tolerance anymore. But yeah, it was fun while I was there.
Right. Well, that's because you're in the perfect weather, state in California, and I lived there for a while too, back in the day, and just recently in January, I decided to take my youngest son there because I was bragging about California as a perfect weather. You're going to love this place so much. And I thought I'd take him to Disneyland because they'd only seen Disney World. And what did it do for the entire weekend, last weekend in January? It rained.
Right. After months and months of drought.
Oh my goodness. I know, after I tell them that it doesn't rain. But anyway. So you arrive in California and you have one script with you, and you just start going to, you just decide that's what you're going to do, right?
Yeah, I'll give you sort of the brief rundown of how it happened because I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, and I was always I always wrote a lot, and I always was a movie nut. Excuse me. Even, there'd be summers where we'd open the paper because no internet back those days. And we'd look for a movie, and I'd just seen every single one. So I'd always been a movie nut, but it never dawned on me that it was an option for, a career. So I went to University of Florida. The only semi-creative thing I could think to do there was I majored in advertising. But then when I got out, they were paying $12,000 a year, and I had student loans. So there's no way I could even do that. So I just stumbled into a series of just horrible jobs. I was a retail manager for a men's store, but not even a cool store like Sears. And, it was And actually, the epiphany to write actually came there because I remember it very specifically, I was being screamed at in the middle of the floor for misaligning an underwear rack by my district manager. And I just thought to myself, what have I done with my life? What am I doing? So as soon as he left, I went right up to the computer store upstairs, electronics store, got a computer. Then I bought a briefcase. And so I went into my little shoebox office and I put the computer inside the briefcase and I just started writing. And the idea was that if anyone came into my office, my briefcase would be open. It looked like I was digging around in there and not writing. So that's when I actually pounded out a book first. I was just reading a lot at the time, and that seemed like the way to go. And then right after that, once I knew just how much I remembered how much I loved writing, that's when I decided to try script. So, yeah, I had one script that sort of had the revelation that this is what I wanted to do, and just, I just put everything in the car and came out to California. I'd never been here, didn't know anyone. It was just sort of this thing of this is the only thing I could, see myself doing. So what choice do I have? So I just sort of came out and, then it was a matter of getting anyone to read anything because everyone in California has a script. And most places don't take any sort of unsolicited material for legal reasons. So how it happened for me is one of my buddies out here that I'd met was dating a girl who was on a TV show, and she had an agent. So he basically browbeat her into giving the agent my script, and that's sort of how I got my first agent. So.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Because I have heard how difficult it is, to just show up and say, okay, I have a script. Well, like you said, everybody has a script. Everybody,
the editor's got a script. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it is difficult to get anybody to actually read your script. So, and then was 21 Jump Street your first? Was that like the first movie you worked on?
So basically what happened is I had that one script that I came out here with, and like most people at that time, it was sort of a Tarantino ripoff, maybe a Coen Brothers ripoff. It was just sort of the first thing I'd ever written.
Right.
So that basically sort of was an example that I could theoretically write, and so that got me an agent, but then they were like, you need to write an actual, spec script that we can go out and sell. And so I wrote this thing called Scared Straight. That was my first spec, and that actually went to New Line, so I sort of got the ball rolling there, and then it got on the blacklist, so that was a little bit of heat. And then I wrote a second spec that was called Straight and Narrow that went to New Regency, so I was sort of 2 for 2 and getting a little momentum, and it was based on that I sort of went in for the meeting for Jump Street and got that job, and that was my first real assignment, say.
Wow. And, I love that movie. First of all, that was an amazing movie. My children watch it over and over and over again. That's one of the ones that like they owned as soon as it came out in DVD. But when you write, what I always think about especially when I'm talking to screenwriters. So when you didn't write the original script, right?
No. So how it went was this. There were two guys, and I believe it was Applebaum and Nemec were their last names, and I think they wrote Ghost Protocol, one of the Mission Impossibles, really great writers, and they wrote the first script, and it was really, really great script. The problem for me was that it was all sort of based around like this supercomputer, and it was very sort of sci-fi, and it didn't seem to me that anything like high school kids would be getting into. So my pitch was, I'm just going to rewrite the whole thing and do something completely different. And the irony will hit in a second, because I wrote that, and basically on the strength of that, that's what got Jonah Hill attached. But then he brought in his buddy, and the two of them completely rewrote me. So there's probably, maybe 10-15% of my script left in the shooting script. So, and that's basically Hollywood in a nutshell. So that was my experience on Jump Street.
Well, and I think that that's good for beginning screenwriters to know also, is that, you know, sometimes you're going to be on a project and you could be the person rewriting somebody's project, or your project also gets rewritten, you know, somewhere down. And like a movie like that, like it's gone through how many people to get to where it is, you know?
No, and you're sort of at that mercy, like that first script that I wrote, which was Scared Straight, that was a new line, had a lot of heat on it. Had at the time, and these were super big names at the time, like Samuel Jackson was just sort of hitting, so he was attached in the lead, and then a guy named Rob Cohen was the director who had done Fast and the Furious, and he just did, I believe, Triple X after, I can't remember, but anyway, he was really hot, so we had all this momentum, and then a guy came in and rewrote me, and then apparently, from what I hear, just did not do a great job, and that sort of killed it. So you're sort of at the mercy of who's coming behind you. You know, if it's someone that does a really good job, you know, it can sort of catapult it into getting made. If someone does a bad job, it can kill it. So you're sort of rolling the dice.
And it must, I mean, I guess not getting your name attached to it is hard too, but you still get to, I mean, like when you go out for your next one, do you still get to say like, well, I was a part of 21 Jump Street, you know, even though your name's not like up on the screen at the time?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what my agents were doing at the time, because again, it was my script that sort of got Jonah Hill, so that was something I could sort of push. And you know, at the time it hadn't come out yet, so credit wasn't sort of established. So they were basically pushing that hard, and that, you know, was able to get me a couple of other assignments and sort of keep rolling at the time.
And which is also awesome when you can get attached to a movie like that, because that movie did have so much momentum at that time, you know, to be able to then get to be heard on future scripts, right? Right.
And so basically, you sort of levels in your career, and something that I'm even fighting now, which is, you know, you get a certain amount of heat when you sell something. You get a certain amount of heat when you get name actors and directors attached, and then the bigger one really is when you get the movie made. You know, you can have a bad movie, and sometimes even movies that don't even do that well, but there's a certain heat that you get from getting a movie made, and that's sort of another level. And you know, I keep having my close calls with getting a movie made with my name on it, and I've, you know, so really that's I'm one of those working writers so far that hasn't had sole credit on anything, even stuff that, a couple of things that maybe I should have, but it's a whole nother story.
Well, when I was talking to Eric Bork, and he was telling me, like, after he wrote Band of Brothers, that kind of same thing happened to him. You know, because you start to think, oh, well, I wrote Band of Brothers, so, you know, I should be able to do anything, right? You know, and he said, and then it started stalling, and he was like, oh, it doesn't work like that, being a screenwriter. You know, it just doesn't.
No, sorry. Yeah, and even today, especially today, you know, it's sort of even a little bit harder than back then, which was, 9 years ago now. But, you know, because they're making less films, they're making bigger films, and that was sort of what I ran into, you know, in part of my career is I got sort of pigeonholed into being the world-building guy. I'd written a script, wrote Barbarella, the remake, and everyone loved that, so now I was the world-building guy. So they would send me stuff, and I would write stuff that was going to be $200, $300 million, and they're only making a few of those a year. So I was writing all these scripts, and none of them were getting made. Even when we had, like, at Barbarella, we had, you know, Anne Hathaway, and we had, I'm blanking on the guy's name who directed Drive, who would just come off of that. So we had, like, as much heat as you could, but again, it was a $300 million film, and at the time it was a female lead, which was an issue. So it's just hard to get those giant movies made.
Yeah, and that's what I was, you know, I talked to a lot of screenwriters about that fact. It's like, you know, when companies are putting, like Marvel, you know, are putting so much money into 2 movies getting made that year that have to gross more money than what they put into it. And, you know, because I'm also like one of those movie buffs, and of course, all the kids get drawn to that. I mean, and it's awesome, but it's like I love to see just a movie that has some great stars, some great writing, dialogue. It doesn't have to be a huge production kind of a movie, But
yeah, and that's
too.
No. I mean, and if you're starting out, or even me, I put an emphasis on this, which is there are some movies, and that's sort of what I sort of, when I reinvented myself, I wrote another spec called Shadowrun that sold to Sony a couple years ago, and that was my sole focus, was I'm going to write a movie that could be shot for maybe 60 or 70, 80, around there, and that way if you do get a bankable star, a Denzel or whoever it is, it's a reasonable budget with a bankable star, and that is something they'll make. So, if I was starting out, I would probably shoot in that sort of budget range to sort of break through and get a movie made, because you can write your big sci-fi opera, but chances are it's never getting made.
Right. So what made you want to write the book then, Uncaged? What happened with that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure exactly what prompted that, other than, I think at the time, I was in that spot where I was writing all these giant films, and I wanted to do something more, smaller and gritty. And I've always, the first thing I ever wrote was a novel, so I knew I enjoyed it. So I just figured I would just give it a shot, and it would be something that would, it would be sort of a break from screenwriting. And I ended up writing that at the same time I was on a couple assignments. So it was actually kind of difficult to sort of split my headspace and go from one to the other, because they're so, incredibly different. But, I think it was just, let me try this again sort of a thing.
Right. And I heard that, that you were a part of Scared. Did you do a script based on Scared Straight or something?
Yeah.
Like that? Okay.
No, that was the first one that was at New Line that almost got made.
Oh, okay.
So, and I'd always been fascinated by that. I saw that. I don't know if you've ever seen that 70s documentary.
I did. And that's what made me, I'm old enough to have seen that. And that's exactly when I started reading the book. I and not even knowing the connection, I was like, this is like that Scared Straight, where you take your kids and because I have 6 children, 4 of them are boys. And
Gotcha.
I used to kind of do that when they were teenagers. Like they'd get into a little bit of trouble, and I'd be like, all right, well, this could be bad. This could be going down a slippery road. Maybe we should show you, how bad it could be if you can, But that was,
believe me.
Yeah, that was the philosophy. And so when I was reading it, that's exactly what I was thinking of. And I loved your book, by the way. I I didn't say that enough. I really, really loved it, and it has a great story, and it is a page turner. And that's what I was trying to, say in the beginning, is like, I don't have to be told that you're a screenwriter, because you can say, it can be a story and be said in enough, without a lot of without a lot of words that don't need to be said. And screenwriters are amazing at that. You want to read every word of it, because every word is moving it forward, because you're used to doing that in a screenplay.
No, for sure. And it's almost an unwritten rule, at least in the kind of stuff I do, which is, a little more actiony, that, you better, if you have a scene that goes more than 4 pages, and 4 pages in a script is not a lot, because there's a lot of white space. So if you have a scene that goes more than 4 pages, you better have a really good reason. So it's this very truncated space for every scene. It's, how can I get into the scene as far as humanly possible? How can I get out what I need to say in that scene without being heavy-handed, which is really hard, and then get out again? Mm-hmm. So it's a weird, when you go to a book and you have all the space in the world, it's, you have to, it's a complete readjustment. And I was actually in a car, excuse me, with my wife, and she's listening to some books on tape, and it was a Dean Koontz something or other. And he's the character goes into this hotel room, and he's going on and on, and it's about the dust that's on the the cupboard, and there's a couple nickels, and I'm pulling my hair. I'm like, it's so antithetical to what I do, but he's just talking about minutia, and it's just so totally different. And I think when I write a book, even when I'm trying my hardest to stretch out and give as much detail as possible, I don't know if I have it in me to go as far as that,
And I'm just one of those readers that if I'm reading something like that, I get in so many pages and I'm like, where is he again? And then I have to go back because I'm that kind of reader, and I love short chapters. I love when they go, when they're about something, when it's moving the story forward, because I don't do well with the details like that. And there are some readers that do, and I'm not, that's just me. Some people love that, but I really just like a fast-paced story that I can just sit down and also when I sit down and I look at a book and I'm like, okay, this chapter is 5 pages. I got time. And then I'll be like, oh, only 5 more pages? I got time for that. If I sit down and I think, it's 25 pages. Nah, I don't have time to sit down and read 25, So it's just kind of a mental thing I do with a book too, No,
for sure. I'm the exact same way, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think, okay, so before you know it, you're halfway through the book and you had only intended to read 1 chapter. And that's just kind of how it goes. And I think that's why that kind of book also appeals to a lot of people. So, and I do see, you have a lot of reviews on Amazon, and they're all amazing. You're so blessed as a first book to have that.
Yeah, no, I've been really, really shocked and surprised, by all of that. And yeah, I'm hoping, to sort of follow it up and do a second one and sort of, I would love, and this is something we can sort of get into, but, the way things are going now, and actually I just changed managers recently, and I had met with this one guy who was really great, and his whole sort of philosophy was, as a screenwriter, you're going to write a book. We're going to make a book proposal, and we're going to sell that to a publishing company. And when we sell that to a publishing company, we're then going to go to a studio, and off the heat off of the publishing deal, we're going to then sell it to the studio with you attached to write, and we're just going to create this sort of snake eating its tail, and we're going to sort of gobble up every sort of facet of that. And there's as obsessed as Hollywood is now with intellectual property and pre-existing stuff, that's actually a really good model, and that's something I could, the next book I write would definitely sort of have that in mind, I think, unless, I came up with something I just had to write that didn't sort of fall in that category. But it makes a lot of sense to write something that could possibly then be set up as a movie.
Well, I feel like this could be, don't you think this one could be set up as a movie? It kind of that way. Like, I definitely think it could be a movie. Here's the thing. You kind of had the screenplay. Isn't it a lot based on the screenplay? Right. So
it is. Yeah. There's a lot of sort of crossover, and it's tough to get a grounded, sort of contained movie. Like it's a weird thing. You can do some of it, but there's a lot of stuff that they want where they want a bigger hook, where they want something a little more fantastical, and I'm sure that has to do with sort of the wave of superhero movies and sort of fantastical stuff that's come down the pipe that's in their head. So it's definitely something the agents are pushing, but it's just sort of hard to pull off sometimes.
Well, I can definitely see why you would be known as character driven, because I think in the book the characters are what their flaws and their like what gets them through. And it's just for people who don't understand what we're talking about, the book is basically about Jason, a kid who gets in a little bit of trouble, and his dad is the governor, and he decides to put him into this Scared Straight kind of program to see what it's really like if he decides to continue on the path that he's on. And I ended up loving him so much and loving the story so much. I can definitely see why character is one of the things that you focus on.
No, and I mean, that it all sort of stemmed from that documentary Scared Straight, because that literally scared the crap out of me as a kid. And for me, you know, in my head, I'm sort of Jason still, you know what I mean? Because with the Scared Straight, and this is what always sort of fascinated me, is that with that program, there's still that invisible line of that, you know, because they basically put them in a room. Just for the anyone listening to this, they basically put them in a room, line them up on chairs, and then bring in these, you know, lifers, criminals, rapists, murderers, and then they basically just scream at them, and they're like, if you came in here, I would rape you, I would kill you, and just scare the crap out of them. But there's still that invisible line of they're not really going to do that because they're in this program. And I always thought it was fascinating. Like, what if you remove that line? And that's what I sort of do in the book, which is, you know, the prison's overtaking and that program's out the window, and Jason's now sort of, you know, it's a free for all. And so it's basically my worst fear, not only going to prison, but, you know, going to the worst prison in the world. And, you know, it's, you know, it all stems from my childhood fears, basically.
Well, what are you working on right now? Like, whether it's a book or screenwriting, or, you know, what are you trying to focus on?
So I guess it's been a couple of months now, but I sold a pitch to Sony and Original Film. Original does all the Fast and the Furious, and they actually did Jump Street, and they've sort of become my de facto family a bit. I think this is the fifth thing that I've done for them. So it's sort of ironically, after all that stuff we just talked about, it's a big sort of movie. It's sort of a, you know, an extinction-y kind of thing, but with sort of a hair of a sci-fi twist. But it's a big movie, and I'm about halfway through. I turned in my first draft, and I'm sort of getting notes. And then there was the whole thing of, is there going to be a strike, which apparently this morning I read is going to be averted, so that's good. So there was a big rush. I did read that.
I did see that, yes.
Yeah, so there was a big rush for me to sort of get my first draft in so I could get paid in case there was a strike. Have some dough to live on. I have a 5-year-old, so he needs to eat. So yeah, it was just sort of a rush. That's what sort of my sole focus is. I got to get this in if that strike happens. So now I have a little more breathing room.
And you know, that's always another question I have too. Is like, when you're working on a script and you've got one project going, does that ever mean that there's anything going on other, like, are you still thinking about the other book, or, you know, outlining for it, or, you know, still coming up with log lines for another screenplay, or do you just really try to focus on what you're doing?
You know, I'm sort of a compulsive person. If I could do it the way I wanted to, I would just do one at a time so I could really sort of obsess on it. But the problem is with this business, you really can't do that. So basically it's while I sold this pitch, while I'm writing that, I'm also coming up with ideas, because that was an original idea. So I'm coming up with new ideas because I want to write another spec script. So I'm coming up with ideas for that. I'm actually talking to a buddy of mine, a guy named Tommy Wakola. He's a director, a really great director, and a super cool guy. He did Dead Snow, and he did the Hansel and Gretel movie with Jeremy Renner. Anyway, so he and I are talking about writing something together. So it's trying to jam as many eggs in the basket as possible, just because this town's so nutty. You know, if you just as a lifestyle, if you put all your focus into one thing, with every project, it's just a roller coaster. It's, you know, and everything's heightened. So it's, hey, this guy got attached, and it's the greatest thing in the world. It's going to get made, and then like something else will happen, and then they're pumping the brakes, and it might not get made. Like, and if you have one thing, your life's a roller coaster. You know, you could become a manic depressive. You know, everything's either great or it's horrible, and you're up and down, up and down. So the key really is to have as many things going as you can, just to sort of diffuse all that. I
guess it was right, and I think that as you know, if you were to compare screenwriting and author, you know, you can, as an author, I mean, I know your book was published by a publisher, but I mean, with Amazon out there, you could be a writer and you could just keep writing, because you can self-publish. You could get it on Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
You can just keep going, keep going, keep going. As a screenwriter, it seems to me is a much more, for lack of a better word, stressful kind of career because there's only so many movies that are going to get made. There are, like you said, it's like, oh, this movie is going to be out in 6 months. Oh, no, it just lost funding. Oh, now it has a producer.
Right.
Oh, no, now it doesn't. Like, that does seem very stressful for me. Like, and especially for writers, because it's like you just want to be writing. You just want to write, and you want to, of course, you want other people to see it. But, it's not up to you to get that. You can't do it alone. Whereas an author, like, you can do that. You can just go publish books and, and have them out there and keep going. But as a screenwriter, you've got a lot more to be concerned about and a lot more people critiquing, too, what you're doing.
Well, and that's you just hit on another big thing. That's what's great about the book is because when you write a screenplay, everyone's giving you notes. Everyone's, trying to get you to do things and stuff. You'll get notes that you don't feel are even, good for the project or a good idea, and you're sort of navigating all that. So you're right. With a book, you can just, especially with self-publishing, so easy these days. You can just pound some stuff out, and that's what I would do regardless. I mean, I definitely want to get another book going, as soon as possible. It's finding the time, because I also need, per my manager and agent, I need to be getting into TV, which I want to do. He actually, this is sort of interesting. He, of my agent, of all the clients that he has that are screenwriters, only 2 aren't in both TV and movies, and I'm one of them. So I need to get on. So,
well, okay, that's a little bit different because that world is a little bit easier to get into with Amazon and Netflix having their own series. At least that's getting a little bit, and then all the channels that now have their own. Back in the day when you had 3, then 4, then like at least to me it seems like that's a little bit open, more of an open field. They have channels that are actually have very specific shows on it for that genre, and like every genre kind of has their own channel, and then like I said, Netflix and Amazon have their own shows now, so I think that does open it up a little bit.
No, for sure. And here's the trick with TV is, you're right. There's a lot more buyers, a lot more shows, and there's a lot more opportunity. The only sort of downside to that, and stuff that I've run into, and why I haven't sort of made a huge push into TV yet, is that literally everything you could think of has been done or is in development right now. I mean, the craziest thing you could think of, an alien who, is a transvestite, and he's whatever you can think of. I've said the craziest stuff to my agent. I'm like, what do you think about this? And they're like, yeah, there's 3 of those in development. And you're like, because there's so much. So it's really hard to, find something original that'll, it's just hard. The more, and I only say that as, the more, I only mention those 2 things as something that is super specific.
Right.
I mean, the most specific stuff, like there's, anything, any sort of subculture, any sort of specific stuff, anything involving anything, is just so much that's sort of covered it already. So it's hard to find something. And then, I've gone in and pitched TV and had a guy talk to me for, 10 minutes about how all they want to do is original stuff that no one's seen. And literally above his head was all the CSI stuff. Like, he was the production company for CSI, and there was like 50 CSIs. As he's telling me how, he only wants to do original stuff. So it's just weird, it's weird. It's just sort of hard to figure out something specific and original and interesting, to do.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, because after the CSI stuff, everybody was like, okay, I'm over the crime. Like, I can't watch another. Plus, it's hard for them to keep coming up with original stuff, too, with how many of those shows that they had. But I'm finding that, and I'm in my 50s, and I like the shows like Billions and House of Cards and, that kind of, that's enough drama for me,
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's just sort of hard to figure out. It's also coming up, it's trying to find those unique worlds too.
Right. Right, exactly. Those, like you said, they say, I want something original. Oh, but I want it to be like this. And you're like, okay. and
then frankly, that's sort of stuff I actually want to see. Like one of my favorite shows is Transparent. I think that's one of the most well-written shows I've seen in forever. And what hooked me is it's a world I didn't know, and it's interesting to see. And that's sort of, where I sort of struggle is because that's such a specific point of view too. So it's coming up with a unique world that you can go in and sort of pitch that, that hasn't been done 1,000 times. So.
And that you could keep going with, because it's not about writing one show. It's about, okay, I've got to write, 13 shows of this. So we're
they want to know minimum how your show is going to go 5 seasons.
Oh, right.
So now there is some cool stuff being done that's sort of one-offs, like True Detective and what have you, but they'll then do a separate one, and Fargo and stuff like that, and Big Little Lies and all that sort of stuff. So there's a market for that. It's just smaller. They still want how are you going to do this for 5 seasons? So.
Right. And I even get attached to the BBC shows. I got really into Queen Victoria, and even though how it's going to end, I love it. It's like you get enough good characters, and of course how it's going to end, but you're not that but they got to keep it true, but make it fascinating at the same time, And I really love those period, that period stuff. So. Well, anyway, it was so much fun to talk to you, Joe. I learned so much, and it was great hearing, about the movie industry, and I can't wait to. I really think you should write another book. That's just my opinion, but
no, thank you. I'm definitely on it. I'm in idea mode, so I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next. But I definitely want to. I have a really good time writing it, and the response has been great. So I definitely want to do another one. It's just got to carve out the time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you let me know when you get that other one out, and so I can read it. Okay, keep me updated.
Yeah, you can help me push it.
I definitely will. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right, sounds good.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.